Stay healthy, safe distance. I wish you joy and peace. And now I'd like to turn the program back over to our moderator, Alexandra Malone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Stanfield. It is now my pleasure to introduce our special guest, Judge T. Michael Peay, who is now a retired former Assistant Legal Advisor at the U.S. Department of State, Office of the Legal Advisor, who enjoyed a long, successful career of government service. During those years, he was privileged to provide critical advice covering a broad spectrum of legal issues with respect to U.S. relations with countries of the Middle East, South Asia, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean. He also worked extensively in the United Nations pertaining to matters both in Washington and overseas, where he advised on human rights, humanitarian, cultural heritage law, and other major issues. Judge Peay relentlessly pursued his passion for music, and especially jazz, as an adult, and eventually became a competent and respected jazz musician. Join me in welcoming Judge Peay. All righty, and Mr. Peay, if you can confirm if you can unmute yourself.
Good evening, and first of all, let me thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Alexandria. And I want to salute my distinguished colleague and friend, Ambassador Sylvia Stanfield, who's done such a marvelous job with this organization, bringing it from infancy through adolescence and now into full adulthood. And you've done a marvelous job. I hope that many of you were able to tune in early to listen to the lovely Christmas melodies that were being played that really set the tone for this evening, for the fun that we're going to have. And let me just say that I have two North Stars that are sort of guiding me tonight, or inspiring me, I should say. The one, of course, the most obvious one is that it's Christmas time. It's a season of love, remembrance, retrospection, peace, introspection, and nothing helps to bring about those good feelings more than music. Music is like an elixir. The other North Star, which none of us can ignore, is COVID. But thankfully, as from last week, we now can see COVID as a half annoyance because we can see the vaccine coming. And so one of the songs that I intend to play tonight, I'm going to ask you to substitute the word blues for the word, substitute the word COVID for the word blues. And when you hear this song, and for those of you who know the lyrics of this song, you will understand why I selected COVID as the equal to the blues. But let's get started with a couple of Christmas melodies, and then we'll segue into the jazz, okay? I won't need to introduce these first two tunes because I think you'll all know them.
And I'm going to encourage for those of us, because I see folks clapping for you, Mr. Peay, feel free to unmute and clap to show the praise for this for these excellent performances.
Thank you very much. Even if I couldn't hear it, I feel it. I feel it. Thank you. I feel it. Well, we're going to segue now into the jazz portion. I thought we should do homage first to the Christmas season. No better way to start than with a very popular Miles Davis tune that's called Blue and Green. Okay. Thank you. While we're, that was from this great album, All Blues. Everybody should have that in their jazz collection. While we are in the blues mood, remember I mentioned COVID and the blues. And this song that I'm about to play now is called Good Morning Heartache. The heartache is the blues. When you got heartache, you got the blues. And the lyrics of the song is Good Morning Heartache. You've been around so long, in so many words. It says, you've been around so long. I wake up every morning and there you are, so you may as well just come on in. Well, that's the way we've all felt about COVID since February. Couldn't get rid of it. It was nothing but a heartache, nothing but the blues. But now we're turning the corner on that. So Good Morning Heartache. Okay. Ligia, it's the name of a woman. It's written by Antonio Carlos Jobim. Many people don't play this, but it's a lovely tune. I hope you will agree. The little chime you heard at the end was my 14-minute mark. so I could, now, since we had allotted 20 minutes more or less for this opening part, I'm going to play this last tune before we start the talk session. But I thought I'd give you a little extra treat so you could hear something a little bit more than a solo piano. This time I'm going to be playing along with a band, a recorded band. And some of you know Chet Baker, and he has a recording of a wonderful tune that I love called Have You Met Miss Jones? I don't know if there are any Joneses in the audience, but this is a very popular tune that I hope you will enjoy. Let's give a listen. I like that too.
And thank you so much. I'd like for us, if possible, if we could all again unmute and just give Mr. Peay a round of applause again, please, for sharing these beautiful tunes with us, both the holiday and the jazz music. Thank you so much, Mr. Peay.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
So before we begin our discussion, I'll recommend if you can come a little closer to your microphone so folks can be able to hear you loud and clear.
Sure.
So I have a few questions, just a little bit about you and your experience and your passion for music. For folks who are listening, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. So to begin, I'm curious to know, so where does your passion for music stem?
Where do all good things stem from? From our mothers. From our mothers. My mother was the church organist, pipe organ. I mean, she was a serious foot-working pipe organist, and she was a piano player. She could read music. As they say, she could read a fly off a page of music. And I have a younger brother who is a monster piano player, and I have two sisters who play. I'm the only
Mr.
one.
Peay, folks are asking if you may need to get a little closer to the mic for some folks, including myself.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Better?
Yes.
Okay. I was saying that my mother was the inspiration. We had a piano in the house. She was always playing it, and when we didn't hear her playing at home, we heard her playing at church every Sunday. And I have a younger brother who's a monster piano player. He went to the Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore. He plays now mainly religious music. I'm the only one who's been drawn to jazz because I just find it's like the title of that wonderful Stevie Wonder album. These are all the songs in the key of life and all the moods, all the things, from spiritual to, the funky to everything. And the other thing is I studied piano for 2.5 years as a teenager. It stopped. And then I picked it up again at the age of 40. And I want to emphasize that point because I often hear people say, and you probably often hear people say, gee, I wish I had could learn to play an instrument or play the piano or play whatever. It is never, ever too late. You will be surprised that as an adult student, if you really want to do it and you apply yourself just half the way that you would have done as a kid, you will make progress so quick that your progress will inspire you to just say, well, if I did this, let me just go on to the next step and the next step. Next thing you know, you're going to be playing. So, and I love the music. I love jazz. It just it's in me. So, and I grew up listening to it. My mother, and it was in the house. We listened to everything, but I fell in love with jazz. That's how it started.
Thank you. Can you share more about your immense professional journey and what you personally consider to be the highlights?
There's so many highlights, and it's a great question. Um, I come from a family of 10 children, okay? 5 boys and 5 girls. And for those of you who are mothers, let me put an important footnote on this. No twins, no triplets. My mother went to the labor room 10 times. And so uh, we were not wealthy, but we were rich in love and the spirit of learning, education and music and inspiration. And my father was one of the hardest working men I know, and I get my work ethic from him. So I had positivity coming in on both sides, and my grandparents. Well, I was fortunate to know and love and really know my grandparents on both sides. So all I had was dreams. But what happened was, because of dreams and spiritual influences, I was blessed to pursue my dreams and not be discouraged because I didn't have money and I didn't know how I was going to achieve I wanted to be an international somebody. I don't care what it was. And so I started studying maps of the world. And before I even graduated from elementary school, I knew the capitals of many of the countries in the world. Go to movies and see these far off places and say, "Oh my God, I gotta go there! I gotta go there!" And I got on a student ship when I was 19 years old in New York in the harbor, having just won a national scholarship to go study in Paris, France, at the University of Paris for a whole year. And I came in number 2 in a national scholarship contest of French. And I got on the ship, the SS Aurelia, I'll never forget, when I was 19. And 9 days later, when we landed in France, I was 20. So at the age of 20, I was a student in Paris for a whole academic year, studying with students from all around the world. Now, you can imagine what an inspiration that was. And I was elected president of my student body at this private Franco-American school I also attended. And I wound up leading a group of 30 people to the Soviet Union and to Poland when I was 20 years old. I was responsible for a group of 30 people, getting their passports, visas, and waking them up in the morning and checking the bus to make sure everybody was on. And we lost one person in the Moscow subway for about a half an hour, but we found them. So I learned responsibility, and I wasn't shy about taking on responsibility early. Did very well, maintained my 3.9 something average, even while I was overseas. And I was able to get a scholarship to go to Johns Hopkins for my master's. I graduated from there with honors and got into Harvard Law School and did well. And from there, I just pursued my dreams. I practiced law in a private law firm. The most exciting first experience that anybody could have was the one I had fighting apartheid in South Africa as a young lawyer. I I was fighting from my office in downtown Washington, D.C., right off of K Street. But I did visit South Africa, and I traveled in South Africa and met with uh, all the major political parties and people, from Steve Biko to Winnie Mandela. And I even visited in jail at that time the man who's the current president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. He was one of 9 students who my organization was funding the legal defense of, because they were just university students who had been charged with treason because they were publicizing and circulating documents on campus, university campus, criticizing apartheid. Now that's First Amendment free speech for us. And we said we must fund this defense of these people and bring international attention to these gross human rights violations in South Africa. And we did it, and I visited him in jail. We had with him and 8 other university students. And there's a story I could tell about that, but we don't have time for that. It would bring tears to your eyes. And
We have
my
time.
great,
This is what we're here for.
well,
No,
okay.
a little bit.
I will tell you this. We were down in, just about 45 minutes before the hearing in that case. I came there at a critical moment in the case when the charges were going to be read against them. And because I was with their lawyer, and I was a lawyer, I was able to go into beneath the courtroom where they were the holding cells, where they were, to meet with them in their cells. And we talked and we brothered up and bonded and everything. And they asked me questions and and we hugged. And then the time came when they had to come up stairs for the hearing. And they were all shackled had shackles around their ankles, heavy chains. And there were wooden steps that led up to the main courtroom. So the lawyer and I went up ahead of time because the judge was about to come. We were seated, and then the judge came in and said, "Bring forward the defendants." And then they started singing a freedom song as they marched up the steps. And every time, and they marched in unison. So every time one took a step, you could hear all of them as they were coming up. And the chains, clank, clank, clank. And the first thing that came out of this hole, this rectangular hole in the floor of the courtroom, was not a head, but was a fist. A fist came up. Tears came to my eyes. I sat there and watched that. It was just amazing. They were defiant. And they didn't stop singing that song until it was over, even though the judge asked them to. Well, that was one experience. Another one was visiting while I was there, a court where they arrested women who had snuck into town in violation of the curfews to visit their husbands, whom they usually wouldn't see for one whole year because they would be taken away from their townships, forced to work in the coal mines or the gold mines or the diamond mines. And they wouldn't be able to see their husbands. So sometimes they would sneak into town to be with their husbands, to see them and bring their children. One of the young babies had been recently born, something. And there's a court that was dedicated to nothing but prosecuting these women and other people who had violated the curfew. I went into the courtroom and to the courthouse, and I noticed there was a big divide, and all the white people, all the black people were seated over on that right, and the left side was for whites. I said, I'm going to sit on the white side of the courtroom. I sat there for about 20 minutes and watched. It's like an assembly line justice. The judge would sit there, and he would tell the prosecutor to read the charges and ask her, why were you out? Did you have permission? No, I came to see my husband because here's our little baby. She said, 15 days in jail and 91 rands, fine. Next, 91 rands, like $150. That woman didn't have $150. They put her in jail. So he sat there, and I sat there, and the judge didn't see me at first. And then finally there was a pause and a delay, and how quickly they could get the next one out. So the judge sat back in his chair and he looked around. He was startled and he leaned forward, looked over his glasses, saw me, a black man, sitting on the white side. And I could almost read his mind. This man is either crazy, or he's not South African. Maybe he's an international observer. Oh, okay. What happened next? I then sat there. The next 5 cases that came up were dismissed. He didn't know how long I had been sitting there watching his outrageous administration of justice before. So he wanted me to get this false impression that he was being lenient and fair and so on to these women, when in fact he wasn't. And I felt guilty when I had to leave because I had an appointment I had to get to my next appointment. So I stayed as long as I could, and I left. Finally, I wound up being arrested and detained, not arrested formally, but detained in South Africa in a room at the airport after I had just come back from what is now Zimbabwe, and interrogated, and all of my papers were inspected. And they wanted to take them, and I refused to let them take them unless someone from the U.S. Embassy was there to say that they were illegal for me to have. They were not used to Black people talking back and pushing back at them like that. So after 2.5 hours and searching all of my luggage and my papers, I left. And then they sent a diplomatic note to the U.S. Embassy saying, tell that man to leave in 24 hours or he will be arrested. And so I left. So this was before I even got to the State Department. But when I got, I was invited to join the State Department by the man who taught me international law. He thought I was a bright student in his class, and he wrote me a letter of recommendation to get into Harvard Law School. And from there, I kept having blessings, one after another, including, traveling in the Middle East. I'll tell you about this story. We was on a secret mission to a certain country in the Middle East. And the day that we were supposed to take a plane from Jeddah in Saudi Arabia to fly to that country, we got notice that an assassination had taken place that had been orchestrated and engineered by the president of that country against the president of another country. And we were supposed to be meeting with that same president in that country. So the State Department called off the trip at the last minute. And I went on for a meeting that I had one-on-one as the State Department's lawyer in Iran, 1 year before the embassy was invaded, for a meeting to discuss some $55 million that they owed to the United States. And you see, the stories just keep, this is why I'm writing my memoirs, because my life has really been blessed with extraordinary things, meeting extraordinary people, including Nelson Mandela. I was part of a delegation of 12 or 15 people who were at Andrews Air Force Base, who was invited to be at Andrews Air Force Base to bid him and his new wife farewell when they had made their last visit to the United States as president of South Africa. I shook his hand and told him I was part of the struggle, that's what we called it. And he was so happy and grateful. I gave him a gift, a personal gift. And we watched his plane take off. And I've had tremendous blessings. But if you have a more specific question, see, I could go on and on. So you have to stop me unless you have a specific question.
Look, I could sit here and listen to you speak all day and share these stories because, as someone who is, and I'm sure with my fellow kind of peers in this career field, to really hear firsthand these experiences is truly a blessing for us to even be able to hear and witness this. Yes. So we are so thankful to have you here and share all of these stories. Again, I could sit and talk about this topic alone.
Right.
For hours probably. I do have one more question to ask, and then we'll open it up for a few questions from Q&A.
Okay.
Working reception. So my final question is, so pertaining to music,
yes,
particularly jazz music, that has proven to be a powerful tool of diplomacy.
Yes.
Can you share your perspective on the intersection of jazz, in the diplomatic and international affairs space?
First of all, that is such a brilliant question. It is so relevant and pregnant with a lot of critical facts. And I'm going to show you one right now. I'm going to show you this. I'm asking all of your viewers to take a good look. I'll try to do it. At this picture. This is a picture. These black soldiers are black doughboys who fought in World War I on the Western Front of France. They were all from Harlem. They were all part of the same unit. They joined as they were part of the same orchestra that had played in New York, including at Carnegie Hall in 1913. Okay, 1913. These brothers were under the leadership of a man who U.B. Blake called the Martin Luther King of music. His name is James Reese Europe. Yes, Europe, like the continent of Europe. He was a black man who was a brilliant musician, composer, conductor, and band leader. And he and all of his orchestra joined as a unit of the army together, and they took their instruments over to the battlefield. As people who study the details of World War I know, there were many long periods when there were lulls in the fighting because people had run out of ammunition, and sometimes it was Christmas time or a holiday. These guys brought their instruments to the battlefield, and when they were not fighting, they were playing jazz over there. The French fell in love with it. And if you look at these guys, so you probably could have seen in your lifetime or in your family somebody who looks like one or more of these guys, you know. Anyhow, the French fell in love with it. It was so popular with them that, by the way, they fought with the French army because the American army would not let them fight on the battlefield alongside of white American soldiers. So there came a time when in the war with Germany, the Germans were really beating the French quite badly, and the French senior general, appealed to the Americans, said, "We need some help. Can you give us some of your men?" He said, "Well, we don't normally blend our forces with foreign forces, but I have some black soldiers over here. I can give you those." So they joined the French army. All right. They were loaned to the French army. They fought so well that the Germans called them the Harlem Hellfighters. That's the name that they got, the Harlem Hellfighters. And they developed a reputation on the battlefield, and at the end of the war, they fought so valiantly that the French military gave the whole unit their highest military honors.
Wow.
And they asked the American army, would they please allow them to stay in France longer, so because they wanted to put this orchestra on tour around France to introduce the French society to this new form of music they'd never heard before, called jazz. The Americans said yes. These guys arrived in France on New Year's Day, 1918. They did not return to the United States until February of 1990. In other words, a year and 1 month later, because they toured all of France. They performed at the Treaty of Versailles signing ceremony, where all the peace agreements were signed and worked up. They performed there, and they were given a grand parade from the docks in New York up Fifth Avenue to Harlem. And there are pictures of people hanging out of their windows and cheering and confetti and welcoming. They came back as heroes. They were diplomats for the United States. They took culture, black culture, which opened up France to this day as one of the strongest supporters of jazz. And so the State Department kept using jazz ambassadors because all around the world, Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Dizzy Gillespie, uh, uh, the guy who wrote Take Five, Dave Brubeck, all of them. So our people and jazz in particular have served as a galvanizing positive force for America and American culture. It's just that we keep loving this country, but they're still not loving us back sufficiently. But if you want to know about the history of jazz and diplomacy, it starts with them. The Harlem Hellfighters from New York City.
Thank you so much for that response. I'm looking here in the chat. For folks who have questions, again, please feel free to put them in the chat, or there's a raise your hand function. Feel free to also physically raise your hand if you like. I'm able to see folks. I see Miss TT raising her hand, so feel free to go ahead and unmute. And when you ask your question, so that we as BPIA members can be familiar with each other, please just say your name and maybe your current city, and then feel free to ask your question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm Michelle TT. I am.
Oh, yes, Michelle. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Michael.
Good to see you.
I am a founding member of BPIA. I live in Alexandria. And I didn't know, I had a question that occurred to me after you started talking about your career. So I didn't know whether to ask the musical question or the career question, but I'll go with the musical question because I'm a jazz lover too.
Uh-huh.
I grew up with a dad who played jazz all the time. How do you see the future of jazz?
Well, you put your finger on a hot button issue that flared up a lot at the end of the 1990s, kind of calmed down in the 2000s, but it's still not over yet. And I'll get right to the point. What I mean by that is there is no question but that this music was created as a result of the wit and the ingenuity of Black men and women who had God-given musical talents, and who, once they got access to European instruments, which they didn't have access to in Africa at the time of slavery, and which at the time that they were in Africa before they came here as slaves, and during the time they were here as slaves, some of them gained access to like violins or whatever. But it was only after liberation and emancipation that they gained regular access to pianos and trumpets and horns and all the instruments, and they started. In other words, we created this music, but there's something about this music that's so powerful and ingenious that others have wanted to try to claim that they are as responsible for this music as we are, when in fact that's not the case. It started in New Orleans. It comes from the synthesis of our experiences, which no white person can trace their lineage back to. Okay, and I'll give you an example. That same group of Black doughboy soldiers that I just showed you, when they were put on tour around France, initially, in the first couple of towns, there were some people in those towns who didn't believe that these guys were playing those instruments, because they never heard instruments make those kinds of sounds. They were bending notes and playing jazz. And so what the French government had to do to convince people that these are not guys who are putting black magic over you to make you think that they're playing music, they had to build a portable stand, a rising stand, so that the musicians could be seen from the back of the crowd actually playing their horns and their instrument. This was, in sync with the music. So this goes to show, I mean, we go into basketball and the game changes. We go into any sport, we keep bringing new ways of interpreting whatever we go into, and our culture is so strong. So the long and short of it is, Black people are going to have to fight to maintain ownership of jazz over the long term, just as we have to fight to have ownership over everything else that we've created and that has been ignored. And that's what I like about Wynton Marsalis and people in his generation. They realize that. And that's not just take anything at all away from. There's a white guy like tonight. I played with Chet Baker. You heard me. Have you met Miss Jones? I mean, Chet could play, and he could sing. And people who are white have talent, and they can imitate and learn to play the music very well. But that doesn't mean that they can now claim they're people who tried to rewrite the history to say that they created the music. That's not true. So we got to stay vigilant. The young generations have got to protect our ownership. We have an indelible and irrevocable ownership to this music, which we must never, ever forget. Was there another question?
Thank you, Mr. Peay. Thank you, Ms. TT. There is another question from Khalil Bentley, so please feel free to unmute yourself, briefly introduce, and then ask your question.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, I'm Khalil Bentley from Chicago, Illinois. And my question was, what advice do you have for young people interested in the foreign service, especially those who are interested in Latin America, since I see that you served in the OAS?
Yes, very good. Well, may I just ask Khalil, where are you are you out of school? Are you in your career already or what?
I just graduated from Denison University in 2020.
Are you going on to graduate school?
Yes, I will be going on to graduate school. I was kind of on the fence, but now that I earned a prestigious fellowship, I know for sure that I will be going.
Congratulations. Do you speak a foreign language?
3, actually.
Good, which?
So I speak Spanish as a second language, a little bit of Mandarin Chinese, and some German.
Well, see, that's fantastic. You've already hit on one of my key points, which is that it's so important to learn at least one foreign language, and then to maintain proficiency on it as much as possible. As a student, you should consider joining some of the international organizations like BPIA, but also like, are you planning on going into law or not?
Not law specifically, but just the foreign.
Okay, but here's what I'm saying. Find organizations that have student, and they usually are cheaper, membership, participation possibilities that have an international dimension to them. And when you go to graduate school, try to join, if there is a publication that writes articles on foreign affairs, try to become an editor on one of those publications, or to write an article, as I've done, on some field. Get your name out there. Publish something, a track or an article on some interesting field. I'm glad you're interested in Latin America, because the world is big, and we need to have Black people everywhere, covering all the geographical regions. You hit upon another point I was going to mention, which is to try to get a master's degree in international relations, if at all possible. If you can, try to get a summer job somewhere in your field, because you'll be able to make contacts and develop a reputation within that field, even before you get out of graduate school. And volunteer if you can, because I tell you, the job that I got fighting apartheid came solely as a result of my volunteering to help that organization that was fighting apartheid when I was with a major law firm here in town, representing Amtrak and all the other, corporations, because I thought what they were doing was promoting human rights. And one day I signed up to be available to write memos if they needed some help, and I wrote part of a brief for this for the guy who was the director of that organization, and he liked it, and I thought nothing of it. And I went back to my work. About a year later, he called me up. He says, "Listen, I really, really like the memo that you did for us, which we used. I'm thinking about leaving and going back to my LA law firm, and I think you'd be a great replacement here. And there's never been a Black person to head this office. Would you be interested?" And when he gave me the details, I said I would have done somersaults backwards to get that job, and it came only as a result of volunteering, and that led to so many other things. So volunteer, and don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone and take on challenges. That's what I would say.
Thank you. I
You're
appreciate it, guys.
You're very welcome.
Thank you
I'll
for
be
that.
reading about you somewhere sometime, I'm sure.
So we have time for one more question. Feel free again to physically raise your hand if you like. I am able to see most folks. Or you can do the raise hand function, or you can type in the chat and say, "I have a question," if you do.
If not, would you like one final jazz tune to go out, or what?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I was going to ask anyway, so I'm
Okay.
glad you beat me to the.
I told you we were going to have some fun tonight, and the next tune is in that spirit of having fun. Let me just say that.
And while you explain, Mr. Peay, if you could try to move a little closer to the microphone so we can hear you, hear you clearly. Thank you.
But you can hear the music okay, right?
Yes, we can hear the
Okay.
music fine. Mhm.
All right. Look, there's a song that many of you know. It's called "Pennies from Heavens." Pennies from heaven. So and pennies from heaven. If you turn your umbrella upside down, and so forth and so on. Well, here's another example of Black jazz brilliance. James Moody and Eddie Jefferson had popularized a version of Pennies from Heaven. And instead of using the regular lyric from Pennies from Heaven, they came up with the following lyric. A long time ago, a second lieutenant named Spears, he returned to the States after being overseas 3 years. His wife said, "Welcome home, dear. But since you've been gone, you see, we've been blessed with a darling baby, and the cute little one is he." She took the baby in her arms and said, "Benny is his name." Spears said, "But I've been going away 3 years. Darling, can't you please explain? So I won't be so dumb. Please tell me, where did this little Benny come from?" Well, every time he'd ask, she'd say, "Benny's from heaven." His face turned red, and still she said, "Benny's from heaven." He said, "Well, I've asked the neighbors all around, but no one can seem to remember Benny coming down." Now, about a little thing like this, I ordinarily wouldn't bother. But what I know of children is they've got to have a father. So as I look at Benny, I can plainly see Benny must be from heaven, because he damn sure ain't from me. And the song goes like this. Benny's from heaven.
Nice.
I'm going to ask everyone again one last time. Please feel free to unmute and applaud it up for Mr. Peay. Thank you so much.
There can only be one immaculate conception, and she was trying to get away with murder on that one.
So thank you so much for performing and sharing your gifts with us, as well as your experiences. This was a very special way for us to end our holiday season here with BPIA. We look forward to seeing you at future events, as well as reading your memoir, hopefully with the BPIA book club that exists. So again, thank you so much for being here. And at this time, we are going to now transition into our virtual networking reception area, which is completely optional for folks who are here.